There were quite a few comments dropped on my last video about this lovely couple here. These guys had a baby and they're making a documentary about their pregnancy and birth. These men think that a pregnancy and birth in a heterosexual relationship in which the wife identifies as a man, has a mastectomy and grows a beard is sufficiently interesting that the taxpayers should pay over $250,000 with a grant from New Zealand and Air, so we can all share in this joyously diverse occasion. The diversity qualifies several intersectional categories of victimhood, including disability, fractional Indigenous nativity and transsexuality. Diversity virtue signalling has been handled with the subtlety of a midnight raid by Destiny Church members armed with rollers and tins of white paint. The imagery includes what for any self-respecting Maori will be embarrassing native tokenism, including feather cloaks, costume native jewellery and Indigenous pattern tattoos. No evidence has been seen that either of the lead actors has any ancestral link to a pre-colonial native of New Zealand. This documentary is morally reprehensible and should never see the light of day. That's because it's a clear case of extreme narcissism. There's no reason for these parents to publicly document the birth of their child other than to draw attention to themselves and exploit their child's birth for self-gratification. The most you got in the old days was a birth notice in the local rag for about $3.50 and at your own expense. And what these grifters are doing is waving a $250,000 rainbow flag in the faces of we the taxpayers. As an aside, this couple's documentary funding could have paid for about 18 IVF treatments. So not only are this couple incurring the cost of their own self-inflicted birthing difficulties, they're also helping themselves to the resources available to a woman who is facing, say, endometriosis through no fault of her own. These men are exhibiting grandiosity beyond the pale and in the process with a complete lack of insight exploiting their son, along with their perceived intersectional diverseness. How could these parents have possibly obtained the consent of their child to make him the focus of a public documentary about his mother having a beard and a mastectomy? What about the stigma this child might feel later in life? The risk of teasing and the humiliation of peers and schoolmates? Not so long ago in New Zealand, the family court stepped in and made a guardianship order giving the state the power to intervene when a porn actress had plans to give birth in the context of a porn movie. Clearly, the court was protecting the child from becoming the unwitting star in a movie that most right-minded folk would find abhorrent. How different is this? Obviously, protection should be forward-looking and aimed at making sure the child is safe from the consequences of its parents' behaviour, regardless of whether their deviancy is given a trendy, progressive spin. Think back to your first day of high school. Would you want anyone knowing that that was you? How on earth do we end up in a situation where the government is apologising for torturing children at Lake Alice in the 1970s, while at the same time funding a documentary that records the diversity exploitation of an innocent child? It's wrong for taxpayers' money to be directed at this kind of infatuated and narcissistic exhibitionism and reproductive exploitation. Taxpayer-funded gender ideology promotion was supposed to have been ejected along with the radical left Ardern regime. When I was doing research for this video, I thought I'm not even going to bother looking into New Zealand on Air because I know what I'll find. But in the end, I couldn't resist and took a peek. There's a link in the description below. It's exactly what I thought, apart from recent post-election appointments which would have probably post-dated the funding decision for this couple's so-called documentary. They're all Ardern diversity hires. Yet again, we see the far-left radicals in the public service controlling the executive power, imposing their weirdo ideas on us and at our own expense. If this documentary funding were put to a referendum, it would be categorically rejected by 99% of New Zealanders. The Broadcasting Act sets out standards that require observance of good taste and decency and respect for the privacy of the individual. In my view, those two standards have been clearly breached. There can be nothing remotely good taste about this documentary, and it gives no thought to protecting its subject, a child, from the effects of diversity victimisation and exploitation caused by its parents' narcissism. And this isn't a first for the press sponsors of this couple, the New Zealand Herald. It was heavily criticised only a few weeks ago for publishing a multimedia story featuring another child victim of gender exploitation. Someone at the Herald, it seems, is somewhat fixated on children in a rather unhealthy way. New Zealand On Air are forcing taxpayers to fund the exhibition of lifestyle choices that are morally repugnant to the vast majority of New Zealanders, just to soothe balm on the inflated egos of some self-indulgent and short-sighted narcissists. It's shameful. Call me old-fashioned, but for me, exploiting a child in public exhibitionism of any kind is wrong. And when it's the glorification of gender ideology, it's an obvious form of child abuse. Furthermore, making taxpayers pay for that exhibitionism is bloody sadistic. The old guard at New Zealand On Air is slowly being replaced, but it is clear that this agency was loaded with Ardern diversity radicals, and in the 6 years preceding the last election, it's been nothing more than a taxpayer-funded propaganda machine for promoting gender ideology and other radical far-left woke agendas. I think it can't be a minute too soon that we completely rid our public service and judiciary of far-left radicals and their influence. What do you think? Leave a comment for me to quote to our politicians. Hopefully with your help we can get some more base decision makers onto the funding board at New Zealand On Air. Thanks for watching, give us a like would you, and hit subscribe to be notified of new content as it drops. See you next time.